Refuting the difference, definition, and causation. 5.4.3 Refuting the difference. Just as many people will refuse to see the comparison, the analogy, between two things, many refuse to accept that two things are sufficiently different. When one refutes the difference, they argue that two things are not different after all. How to refute the difference. To refute an argument about difference, you should point out all the similarities between the two things being compared. Next, you should explain how these similarities do or do not make them different. For example, a prostitute versus a healthcare professional. When you think of a prostitute, you wouldn't relate it to a doctor, for instance. However, this one has a different idea.
The biggest misconception about sex workers is that we sell sex. What we do is offer intimacy, a service, much in the same way that a mental health professional provides a service to the community. A mental health professional addresses mental health needs. A legal sex worker addresses sex and intimacy needs.
Putting it into perspective. One could argue that yes, both do provide a service, however, one saves lives and the other provides pleasure. One requires years of schooling while the other one requires being of age. One is legal across the United States, while one is only legal in a select few counties across the United States. These therefore make a prostitute and a healthcare professional different. Basically, with stance A believing one thing has the same principle as another, and stance B argued against this with the claim that they are more different than they are similar. 5.4.4 Refuting the definition. When a speaker essentializes, she assumes that her definition captures the most important qualities of something. Essentializing definitions always run the risk of excluding or deteriorating someone or something. Essentializing definitions also run the risk of inappropriately omitting something or someone into a category. How to refute the definition. First, you can make explicit all the criteria that your opponent requires for something to be included in a category. Then you can explain why other criteria should be included from the definition. Another approach to refutation, however, is to show your opponent's definition either excludes something that the audience would rather include in the category or omits something that would rather exclude from a category. For example, reverse racism. One stance is counterintuitive. Side A can argue reverse racism is not a thing and they believe that it comes from white people feeling that they're losing their privilege. Whereas side B can argue that when the minority groups get into power, they become racist, which is reverse racism.
A lot of white people say this to me. Hey, Amir. Hey. Get on stage. You make your jokes about white people. You say white people this, white people that. What if I did something like that, huh? What if I got on stage and I said, yeah, black people are like this. Muslims are like that. You'd probably call me a racist, wouldn't you? And I say, yeah, I would. Yeah, you should never do that. That's bad for your health. They're like, well, you do that, Amir. You do that. You get on stage. You make your jokes about white people. Don't you think that's a kind of racism? Don't you think that's dun dun dun? Reverse racism. I said, no, I don't think that's reverse racism. Not because I think reverse racism doesn't exist, right? If you ask some black and brown people, they'll tell you flat out, there is no such thing as reverse racism. I don't agree with that. I think there is such a thing as reverse racism. And I could be a reverse racist if I wanted to. All I would need would be a time machine, right? And what I'd do is I'd get in my time machine, I'd go back in time to before Europe colonized the world, right? And I'd convince the leaders of Africa, Asia, the Middle East, Central and South America to invade and colonize Europe, right? Just occupy them, steal their land and resources, set up some kind of like, I don't know, trans-Asian slave trade where we exported white people to work on giant rice plantations in China. Just ruin Europe over the course of a couple of centuries so all their descendants would want to migrate out and live in the places where black and brown people come from. But of course, in that time, I'd make sure I set up systems that privilege black and brown people at every conceivable social, political, and economic opportunity. White people would never have any hope of real self-determination. Just every couple of decades, make up some fake war as an excuse to go and bomb them back to the Stone Age and say it's for their own good because their culture's inferior, and then, just for kicks, subject white people to colored people's standards of beauty, so they end up hating the color of their own skin, eyes, and hair. If, after hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of that, I got on stage at a comedy show and said, hey, what's the deal with white people? Why can't they dance? That would be reverse racism.
Elementary say their children are facing unequal treatment. That's because they don't qualify for federal Title I funding, and parents say they're expected to pick up the slack. Thanks for joining us. I'm Latricia Thomas.
And I'm Josh Rowe. News Channel 9's Kylie Thomas joins us in studio to break down what the school is doing and why parents say it is just not enough. Kylie.
Well, Josh and Latricia, we've told you about the Fairland Elementary cafeteria issue this past month. Now, some parents tell me the cafeteria is just a symptom of a bigger problem. 3 moms on one mission.
We're tired. We're tired of fighting for what our children deserve.
These families moved to Lookout Mountain so their children could attend Fairland Elementary.
100%. Absolutely.
I love our children.
According to state records, Fairland ranks as one of the top performing schools in Georgia. But this group of PTO parents says Walker County dismisses them.
It's almost like it's reverse discrimination, where our children are not being afforded the same opportunities that other children are.
Caroline Williams says the PTO raises $150,000 each year. They even use the money to pay some teachers. Recently, they're cashing it in to send students home with extra food. She says they have to raise the money because they don't qualify for Title I funding.
We're not talking like thousands of dollars of funding that you miss out. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars.
According to state numbers, 25% of Fairland students qualify for free or reduced lunch. The percentage at other Walker County schools is notably higher. In fact, the next highest elementary school falls in 65%. In order to qualify for federal dollars, a school must have 40% of students on a free or reduced lunch program.
Everything about this scene supports the notion that white South Africans have it pretty good. This suggests that there is another side to the story. White poverty in South Africa has doubled since the non-racial election in 1994. People like Elsabie Blignot are stepping in to help. She goes door to door in poor white areas with bags of food.
When I first met Sis and her family, they were all sleeping on the floor. They were on the cement. They had no beds, they had no furniture, they had absolutely nothing.
Living conditions similar to what you will find in many of the black townships. This tiny house is a home for 2 families.
So all 11 people sleep in this house?
Yes.
It's very small though.
Oh, very, very small.
Laura Fenter and her children, her sister's family. Her mother, Petronella Casimir, lives here too. And they all survive on her $94 a month pension. Petronella believes there's only one reason why they are in this desperate state. It started, she says, when the black government came to power 15 years ago.
In the past, we were the apartheid years, and the white people put them down, and that now it's their time to put us down.
It is true that South Africa has its own version of affirmative action. It's called Black Economic Empowerment, and it was seen as vital in the new South Africa. Go to any one of the government ministries in Pretoria today, and most of the civil servants are black. It used to be that most of the faces you'd see on the streets here were white. Under the apartheid system, if you were a white person, you got a job. Of course, it wasn't just government workers. The entire labor market changed. Years later, blacks and whites are now competing for jobs on equal terms. And whites don't always come out on top.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap. In video 1, reverse racism on this was explained as if the roles were reversed. The whites were oppressed, and the blacks were the one who were picking on the whites. In the second video, the school felt like because their children didn't qualify to get extra funding, they were experiencing reverse racism. In the last video, the whites felt as if the blacks, who were the majority in this case, abused their power with the reasoning of black power and a way to get back at whites. Okay, so putting this all into perspective, when repeating the definition, person A can start by saying reverse racism is not a thing because racism is discrimination against one race based on the belief that their own is better. However, for example, if a black man says that he hated a white man because of what his race has done to his, this is not racism, rather prejudice. And person B can fire back with, if this is your definition of racism, what about the example with South Africa? The blacks used their power of control over the government to oppress the white people, with reasoning being to empower black people. In both scenarios, they address the controversy of reverse racism. Is it a thing? What is it? And is there proof? And they were able to do all of this by refuting the definition. 5.4.5 Refuting the causation. Sometimes it's not reasonable to argue that a causal connection exists just because two things tend to go together or because one thing tends to happen right after another. How to refute the causation. Point out that there are other equally plausible causes. Note that sometimes the effect appears without the presumed cause. Explain that there is no reason for these things to cause one another, so the more likely an explanation is coincidence. For example, global warming. Stance A believes that global warming is caused by humans, while Stance B believes that global warming is a natural process on the Earth and humans do not have a say-so in it.
Okay. In 2011, my wife and I were in Antarctica, renewing our vows. For most of you that don't know, Antarctica's on a mountaintop. Okay? And there is a $500 million facility, scientific facility there, and the scientists came to give us presentations about global warming. And they had cores of ice that they had drilled. They had drilled 4,000 or 5,000 cores, and they only brought 15 or 20. So they're going through the second or third core, and they said 275,000 years ago, this was the temperature, blah, 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 blah. And then 55,000 years ago, the world was 2 degrees warmer Celsius than it is today. This is 2011. And, oh, wait, stop. And he said, and I said, well, you mean the whole world? He says, yes. And the poles are only benchmarks. And I said, well, what about the things that the young woman alluded to? Okay. And he said, it's all cyclical. And although the gas may have exacerbated it, in the cosmos of time, it's not a fart in the wind. In the cosmos of time, of the 13.8 billion years that we've been on this miserable planet, it's not a fart in the wind. And as I told Joe Rogan on his show, and he said in his infinite wisdom, and Joe, if you hear this, I thank you for the opportunity to be on your show. He said, then in 25,000 years, it's most likely not going to be a problem.
Now, there isn't climate, and a few temperature records do not a complete global climate history make. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that we were collecting enough data in enough places to figure out an average temperature for the whole world. Earth is warming up fast, but none of this explains the cause. It could be human activity, but it could also be so many other things. Earth's orbit is pretty wobbly. Our elliptical path around the sun spins like a hula hoop. Earth's axis draws a circle every 21,000 years and wobbles back and forth every 41,000. And all of these affect Earth's climate. But scientists understand these changes really well, and when they use them to predict climate change, they don't see any. The sun provides almost all of Earth's heat, and it also changes in cycles, dimming and brightening, sort of like a light bulb. For most of the last 1,000 years, when the sun turned up, temperatures rose on Earth, and when the sun dimmed, temperatures fell. But in the past few decades, the sun's been cooling slightly, yet Earth keeps getting hotter. Solar activity can't explain today's climate change. We know carbon dioxide traps heat in the atmosphere, and the last time Earth's CO2 levels were this high, Homo sapiens didn't exist. But maybe all this CO2 is Earth's fault. When volcanoes erupt, they release tons of the stuff, like little magma-powered earth bursts. Geologists measured how much, and it turns out humans release about 100 times more CO2. Volcanic activity can't explain climate change.
So, putting this into perspective, beginning the argument, both sides can agree that global warming is a real thing. However, Stance A believes that global warming is a natural part of the Earth's processes. Stance A tells of getting their information from scientists working in Antarctica. On the other hand, since B believe humans contributed significantly to the climate change and cited ruling out other possibilities that could cause the Earth to get warmer, but still concluded that humans had the greatest impact. Overall, both agreed that the Earth was getting warmer, but the reasoning of different causes. Okay, so there was one more thing for refuting the causation, and that would be the slippery slope arguments. When you say that someone makes a slippery slope argument, you contend that the evidence is acceptable, but the conclusion did not derive from the evidence. In other words, agreeing that one stance is reasonable, but arguing a domino effect could occur from that. For example, designer babies. Recently, new technology called CRISPR has been used to deal with the previously incurable diseases such as herpes. If we can use this technology to tamper with genes and do something as extraordinary as that, what could happen next?
Scientists used CRISPR to cut the HIV virus out of living cells from patients in the lab, proving that it was possible. Only about a year later, they carried out a larger-scale project with rats that had the HIV virus in basically all of their body cells. By simply injecting CRISPR into the rats' tails, they were able to remove more than 50% of the virus from cells all over the body. Humans could alter the genome of our entire species because their engineered traits will be passed on to their children and could spread over generations, slowly modifying the whole gene pool of humanity. It will start slowly. The first designer babies will not be overly designed. It's most likely that they will be created to eliminate a deadly genetic disease running in a family. As the technology progresses and gets more refined, more and more people may argue that not using genetic modification is unethical because it condemns children to preventable suffering and death and denies them the cure. But as soon as the first engineered kid is born, a door is opened that can't be closed anymore. Early on, vanity traits will mostly be left alone. But as genetic modification becomes more accepted and our knowledge of our genetic code enhances, the temptation will grow. If you make your offspring immune to Alzheimer, why not also give them an enhanced metabolism? Why not throw in perfect eyesight? How about height or muscular structure? Full hair? How about giving your child the gift of extraordinary intelligence? Huge changes are made as a result of the personal decisions of millions of individuals that accumulate.
So, putting this into perspective, if we use CRISPR to get rid of all HIV, cancer, etc., it could lead to us using it to get rid of minor things such as color blindness, then leading us to take advantage of technology and creating babies with specific things that we want. This can be considered a slippery slope argument because it uses the hypothetical as a basis for a refute.